Hello, fourth grade. Today we are going to start our last chapter in math. So we are going to begin chapter 13 today. Get excited. And we are going to look at lesson 1. So as we venture into chapter 13, we are going to be talking about perimeter and area. But today we are just going to focus on perimeter. All right, so perimeter, first of all, we should probably understand what that is. Perimeter is the distance around a shape. Now, as long as it's a closed shape, you can find the perimeter of it. Most of what we're going to work with is going to be squares and rectangles, so that's what I'm going to show you today. But you can find the perimeter of a triangle, you can find the perimeter of a hexagon, you can find the perimeter of any closed figure, but we're going to work with squares and rectangles. So I like to have a visual reminder of perimeter. So if I draw myself a rectangle, along the outside of it, I'm just going to write perimeter. And I'm going to keep repeating it as I go all the way around. And I'm going to have to turn my book. And I made it all the way around. So anytime you are working with perimeter, you are looking for that distance. You are looking for how long it takes, the distance around the shape that you are looking at. You are never going on the inside of it for perimeter. Perimeter is strictly on the outside. Okay? So in order to figure out the perimeter, I need to have measurements for my, well, in this case, rectangle. So let's say I've got a rectangle and I tell you that the top is 12 centimeters, and we know in a rectangle the top and the bottom have to be exactly the same length, so the bottom would be 12 centimeters as well. And then let's say one side of the centimeter is one side of the rectangle is 8 centimeters, and we know the other side is exactly the same, so this side is 8 centimeters as well. So here's how this works. If I need to find the perimeter of this rectangle, that means that I'm going to travel around the outside. And I like to go one side at a time. So if I start at the top, and you can highlight it as you go too. I'm just using a different color pen. So if I start at the top, I've got 12 centimeters, and I'm going to write that down. So 12, and I add everything together all the way around. Plus, well, as I continue my travels, I'm to 8. So I'll add 8 in there. Plus, let me continue my traveling. 12 plus, and I've got one more side, 8. So I've got 12 plus 8 plus 12 plus 8. So when you're doing this, you are, now I said we were working with squares and rectangles today, but you need to know that if you're working with a triangle, I need to have 3 sides listed here to add up. If I'm working with a pentagon, I'm going to have 5 sides listed here to add up. So however many sides your shape has, you need to have that same amount of numbers in order to add up to find your perimeter. So since we're working with squares and rectangles, I'm always going to see 4 numbers that I need to add together to get to my perimeter. So now that I have my 4 numbers, I need to simply go through and add them. And we know with adding, you can go through and pick whatever numbers you want to join together. You don't have to do them in order, but you totally can. So if I did them in order, I would do 12 plus 8, which is 20. And then I've got plus 12 plus 8. And then I can do 20 plus 12, which is 32. And then I still have that 8 left over. And then finally, 32 plus 8 equals 40. So I've got my perimeter of 40, and don't forget, every time you do this, you need a label. So with perimeter, All I do for my label is I put whatever unit of measure I'm working with. Every single side has to have the same unit of measure, and in this case it does, and it's centimeters. So it'll simply be 40 centimeters. And that's the perimeter for this rectangle. It's the distance around the rectangle. Okay, let's try another one. Draw for me as best you can a square. And we know in a square, all the sides are exactly the same. So let's say we've got 16 inches. So that means every side in the square is going to be 16 inches. Okay, so we said from the beginning, perimeter is adding up all the sides. So if I've got a square and I travel around it, I can do 16 plus 16 plus 16 plus 16. Okay, and then I would go through and add them up. So 16 and 16, well, I don't always want to rely on doing these things in my head. So off to the side I can do 16 plus 16, that's 12, and that's 3. So I've got 32. So I've taken care of 2 of those 16s. Now I know I also have 16 and 16, so if I add those up again, I've got another 32. So now I've got 32 plus 32. So when I finish adding those up for my perimeter, I've got 64. And I need to finish with my label. Everything is in inches, so my label is inches, 64 inches. Now the cool thing about a square, because all of your sides are exactly the same, and I'm doing 16 plus 16 plus 16 plus 16, we also know that if I was to multiply, I could do this a little quicker. So I could take my one number of 16, and I had to add that 4 times, which means I can do 16 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. Oh, so 64 matches 64. So if you're dealing with a square, that could also be a possibility if you didn't want to add all 4 sides since they're the same. Okay, so when it comes to perimeter, there is something that we have that's called a formula. And a formula is something special in math. And basically what it is it is a rule for math. Okay, and so for perimeter, you have a formula that you use every time. So your formula for perimeter, now I'm going to focus my formula on a square and a rectangle since that's what we're going to look at. So our formula would be, I would start with a capital P because that stands for perimeter. And so perimeter equals, now if you remember, a square and a rectangle, they have a length and they have a width. So my perimeter would be equal to, and we use a cursive L, length plus width, which is your W, plus length plus width. So I'm doing the length plus the width plus the length plus the width in order to find the perimeter. So this is a formula, and if I take out each letter, I can replace it with a number from the picture. So let's do one more. So draw for me a rectangle. And the measurements for this rectangle are going to be, we'll say 14 feet and 18 feet. Now, if I give you only 2 sides of that rectangle, you might say, well, Ms. Stone, you said I have to have 4 sides. And that's true, you do. But we know, think about what you know about a rectangle. We know in a rectangle, if the length is 18 on this side, the length is 18 on this side. So if you're only given two sides, I literally want you to fill in the other two sides so that you can see all four together. So 18 here, 18 here, 14 on this width, you will have 14 on this width as well. Okay, so now we've got all four sides. So when it comes to perimeter, if I start by writing my formula, so length plus width plus length plus width, I can now fill in all the pieces I know. Well, I don't know my perimeter quite yet, so I'm going to keep the P. My first length would be 18. My width is 14. My length is 18. And my width is 14. And as you know, you can take and combine things however you want when you're adding. So if I take my two 18s and I add those together, 8 and 8 is 16, and that's 3, so those are 36. And then if I take my two 14s and add those together, 4 and 4 is 8, 1 and 1 is 2. Now I need to take those two answers and add those together. Okay, so I'll do this off to the side where I've got plenty of space. That's 14, 5, and 6. So I now can safely say that my perimeter, and I'm going to start with that capital P so I know exactly what I'm talking about. Perimeter equals 64, and then our label, feet. So our perimeter equals 64 feet. Okay, so that's what you guys are going to work on today, is strictly focusing on perimeter. Strictly looking at the outside of your square or rectangle. And just remember, if you're given only two of those measurements to start with, then I want you to write in the opposite sides for each one. So if the bottom's 18, the top is 18. If the side is 14, the other side is 14. Write it in so that you can see all four sides, and then go through and find your perimeter. All right, have a great day, you guys.